is my privilege to introduce my friend Elizabeth Edwards this morning. She is the founder of Volume PR, Engagement Science Lab, and the Behavioral Communication Movement, a celebrated communication futurist. Love that. Did you write that yourself?
Of course.
Yeah, so good. Who has dedicated her award-winning career to accelerating communication results with behavioral and cognitive science. Her work closes the gaps between the study of the mind and the business of engaging it. As someone I've known for a while, I just want to tell you that I am sorry, but also interested in what Missy is thinking about your journey, how incredibly proud she would be of you, and friend of Missy, friend of mine.
Thank you, honey, so much.
I hope I didn't make you cry.
So thank you all for being here with us this morning. Just a quick housekeeping note, as you see on screen, if you text the word DEC to 855-958-5532, you can get a copy of this beautiful little workbook that we're going to be going through today. I have one extra for whoever puts their hand up first. There you go. There we go. All right. So you can keep notes along with us today because we have a lot to go through. So are we ready to talk about how to blow your mind open here with the science of behavioral communication? So let's go ahead and get started. I like to start with some definitions. I'm the daughter of an English teacher, okay? So we had a lot of dictionary time in our house. So let's start here with a definition of communication. Traditionally, we define communication as the exchange of information from a person, a place, so on and so forth. Only the exchange. What we're here to talk about today, though, with the evolution of behavioral communication, is how to expand the definition so that it concerns itself with the impact that it has. Why do we communicate? We communicate to create understanding, to create comprehension. So the person receiving the message is going like this instead of going like this, right? And yet our definition at a very fundamental level, we're not even thinking or oriented truly around communication to create comprehension and understanding. If you look at our current models that we have, so we all went to school and all studied various degrees in communication and related fields. This is what they give us. You know, this is communication. We have a sender, there's encoding. Anybody feel enlightened? Right? I mean, maybe we have to recognize noise and feedback, have some process, but this is very mechanical. Are we talking about how to create understanding or how to do this magical thing of communication to get a different outcome? Even if we go to the fancier communication process models, still, it's just that there's encoding, there's sending, receiving, and noise. And this is the extent of what we have as parameters, as leaders training other communicators when we think about the models and frameworks that exist in communication. What else do we have to base communication on? You know, I think back to school, back to our training. We have phenomenal wisdom in ethos, pathos, logos, but this is 2,400-year-old wisdom. Has anything happened in the last 2,400 years? Maybe a little that has changed things. There's some core fundamentals and some important things that we learned in rhetoric in college and in some of this framework, but it has been over 2,000 years, and I think we can add some more things. So what have we added in the last 2,000 years? Well, we have grammar, syntax, things like the AP style guide and Strunk and White, but do any of these really still concern themselves with how do I accelerate understanding in the receiver of my audience? In fact, some of the rules that we've been learning from grammar, AP style guide, Strunk and White, our best friends, right, are changing. There's a fascinating book out there called Because Internet. It explains how when we democratized writing down to texting and posting on social, and all of our audiences also became writers in these little ways and started changing the way they use punctuation, changing the rules as they think they should be now as writers, and we're all writing. It's even changed for us as professional communicators the way that we need to think about how we stylize and use grammar so as to not increase distance between ourselves and our reader. I'll give you a quick example from my office. I start all my emails, hi and name, okay? Grammatically, AP, hi, comma, name, period. I had a team member come to me and ask if something was wrong one day. She thought I was upset with her because I was being so formal instead of just like, "Hi, Shannon!" exclamation mark, right? The extra punctuation and following the grammar rules was creating distance between us. Do we ever want to create distance with our communication? And we're trying to do the opposite here. So that's what we're here to talk about with behavioral communication. What rules should we really be following in this day and age to hyperconnect with our audiences? There's a meme going around on the internet that I think says it really well, so I want to just leave it with you here. I used to think communication was key until I realized comprehension is. We can communicate all day long, but if we aren't understood, what good did we do? The main reason this exists for us is that none of us are taught how to create understanding. It is not part of our instructional institutions or our current perspectives on even how we approach communication, engagement. And the problem with that is that this is what we're here to do. We are here to change behavior, to influence decision making by first facilitating understanding. By first facilitating, I get what you're saying and I want to listen. And if we don't first get people understanding and syncing with us, we can't get to these other states. This, I propose, is the reason and the source of the majority of our disconnect. Why we don't see measurable movement in campaigns or in engagement. Why is there so much mis and disinformation? I think you may see today when I teach you some techniques on how we start to really evolve and change our communication, many of the things it is to involve and integrate emotion and feeling into things that mis and disinformation already do really, really well. So the things that are happening in our world that we are wanting to counterbalance with miscommunication and disinformation really have their roots in a lot of the emotion that we're going to be talking about, how we start to begin to create. There's an organization called AMEC. I know that the group I'm with, most of us are familiar with AMEC, the International Standards Association for Communication Measurement. And they create what are called the Barcelona Principles. You see here the 3.0 version of the Barcelona Principles. What I want you to notice, though, on these 7 metrics of how do we measure if we were good at our job in communication and marketing, what the drill down on all of the pages as you go through their presentation, what it's drilling down to say in each of these subsequent details is, did I change attitudes, perceptions, and behavior? So this is in your workbook, and one of the things I want you to think about doing when you go back and spend some time with this is, what are the perceptions that I'm trying to evolve? What are the attitudes? What's the actual behavior state change? It may just be a change in state from understanding to not understanding to understanding, or not giving a rip to caring about something, or considering something. Or it could be very far in that I want someone to go from this belief to a different belief. What is my objective? But I want you to get with yourselves, with your teams, and really start thinking through, first and foremost, what change states am I trying to accomplish in my communication? So as Jen so nicely introduced me, my name is Elizabeth Edwards with Volume PR and Engagement Science Lab. The reason that I'm here to talk to you today, I want to tell you a little bit about my story and what led to this. Was so happy when I went off to college, beautiful Pepperdine University. I was so excited, and I was fired up, ready to major in psychology and communication. I wanted a psychological communication degree. I remember the day I marched into the registrar's office to declare that and was told it didn't exist. I had to pick either psych or comm. And so I took upper divisions in both, and I very quickly realized I didn't want to be on the couch with people and that psychology side of things. But it seemed really just illogical to me that we teach people how to communicate without involving knowledge from the sciences. So after leaving Pepperdine, I began my career first at Boeing in the space division. The space shuttle made engines down the hall from my desk. It's very phenomenal place to work, and great to get started in corporate America and really learning the details of working in corporate communication in a monolithic organization like Boeing. After Boeing, I went to Ogilvy Public Relations, a very large PR firm, where I worked for many years before founding Volume Public Relations. And at Volume, and all this time at these other companies, but specifically once I launched Volume, we started to really focus more intentionally in our agency and with our team on how do we combine communication with the human sciences, or the science of us. And that's what we're talking about today, the science of us. So I'm with a lot of PR agency owners here. In our agencies, it's very common practice to train our teams to subscribe to magazines in a PR agency or different news journals, and we sit around on Friday afternoons and everyone has read something and we talk about that, and what did you learn about how to pitch Fast Company differently because of these points, or what did you learn in Forbes this week that you can share with the rest of the team. Well, we added to that process subscribing to these types of journals. There's quite a few, but things like the Journal of Consumer Psychology or the Journal of Consumer Neuroscience, the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science. We had subscriptions to all these various journals and would cull through them each month to say what relates to our work. And when we would do those Friday trainings where we're going through the news media, we would also sit and go through these journals. I went through them first to study through the studies, pull out what could be helpful to evolve our communication process, help us do this job a little bit more effectively. Then we began testing them. And the team, really quickly at Volume, we realized we were onto something here, because this science started to make our work so much better that we then, a few years ago, launched a company called Engagement Science Lab, where we are helping more specifically not just do communications work, but how do we take this work in a lab and help others apply it in their businesses to improve their communication. Where did we test it? We tested it in many places, starting with strategy, messaging and positioning, whether logos, all the way to PR. Anything in the business environment applies to this training today. We were doing it with large companies, small companies, those in healthcare, consumer, business, technology. We really wanted to put it to the test and see, this isn't just niched to work in one industry, but does this translate as long as we're talking to humans with a mind? And we found it to be incredibly successful. So much so that we often would start working in the marketing and PR departments with our clients, and over time they invite us to other departments to do more work. Is there anyone who would like that happening in your business, right? So we're teaching the communications team how to evolve their language, their scripts, their messaging, their positioning, their strategic ideation, everything around how to speak to the behavioral part of the brain. It worked so well that they started involving us in redoing all of their call center scripts and all of their customer-facing communication, all of those letters, all of that executive communication. There's so much that it grows and goes into, and I want to make sure you understand that what we're talking about applies across all of them. The other key thing to anchor you with before we get into the meat today, I am not talking like a 2% gain, okay? We're not here for little bumps and little lifts. Look at these numbers. Okay, we increased sales for Cerveza Imperial with a strategy based on this 93% in sales, measured in a 3-month period. For BMW, we increased their media coverage 400% over the previous year, only by engaging the media using these behavioral strategies that I'm going to teach you today. Huge gains and lifts in the numbers, not little shifts. It's important to make sure we understand. So what is it that you're going to be able to affect differently by integrating this information into the way you communicate? We're looking specifically at connection, motivation, memory. How memorable is this? Are people going to remember your information longer when you use behavioral engagement techniques? All right, so we're going to sit with some really big terms for a second before we get into the fun of learning some of these techniques. Where is all of this coming from? We're going to headline this as the science of understanding, and this is your moment to see all the sciencey things. So where we're specifically coming from in the fields that are pulled into behavioral communication is behavioral science, which is the science of our actions and our behaviors. You'll see a lot of keywords out there around behavioral science, also behavioral economics. Those are all of the fields of influence that come from that behavioral side. Next are the cognitive sciences, neuroscience, cognitive linguistics. This is the science of how the mind processes words. This science has been integrated and studied in order of this. Next we have social, this is sociology, anthropology, ethnography, those types of studies. What does those whole fields of wisdom have to add to the communication process to help us be more effective? And lastly, evolutionary psychology, the science of ingrained structures and adaptations, looking at cultural factors, looking at psychological factors, things of that nature. It is the studying of all of these different scientific fields that coalesced to create what we call, and your big meaty term that you don't need to remember beyond this moment though, what we call is neuropsychological engagement. And that's what I'm going to teach you today. It is the method of behavioral communication that we are engaging in. So real quick, why that crazy word? Neuro, I'm going to teach you how to engage the conscious mind. And psychological, I'm going to teach you how to engage the non-conscious mind at the same time, so as to accelerate decision making and relieve friction. So communication simultaneously engaging our conscious neuromind with our non-conscious psych mind with science-based techniques that accelerate agreement and change minds and behavior, specifically by, and what you're going to know how to do differently, is limit the interference and interplay of bias, backfire, decision fatigue, and cognitive overload. Those four things are fighting you with swords all day, every day. And you don't necessarily realize that, or we don't have any tools to combat that other than getting louder and getting flashier and using a different platform. But this is going to teach us subtle changes that we make to the way that we design strategies or the way that we put our words together so that we accomplish all of this magic with just our language. All right, so let's get started next on why are people having a hard time hearing us? What is this new reality that we work within that creates interference? First of all, it's estimated our audiences see between 7,000 to 50,000 marketing messages a day. Depends on where you live, of course, alters that factor some. But I want to encourage you, when you go home after this conference, to try to count the marketing messages in your house, in your bathroom and your laundry room and your kitchen. And when I say a marketing message, I don't mean that box of cereal has one. That box of cereal probably has 7. That box, that face cream on the counter probably has 3 or 4. There are messages screaming at you all over the place, all day, in your house, outside. It creates a sense of tuning out that is happening in us and in our audiences. So we can't take in 50,000 messages a day, but we are. Our brain actually can. It is highly evolved to process all of that. So how do we make sure that our messages are ones that the brain knows to pay attention to rather than to keep on autopilot decision mode? In addition to all those messages, how many decisions do you think you make in a day? Too many, right? I doubt you believe, or would have guessed though, that we actually make 35,000 decisions a day. It comes out to 1 or about 2 every second, 1 every 2 seconds. On top of this, we have 70,000 thoughts per day. 70,000 thoughts, 50,000 messages, 35,000 decisions. I know it's the morning, but is anybody else tired? This is why we say one of our big jobs is to overcome cognitive overload. So what is cognitive load? Cognitive load theory is that our minds can only manage so much. They can only handle so much because of 3 different types of load. Intrinsic load, this is how complex is the new information coming at me, right? That is a certain type of load that makes something easier or not for us to process. Do I have to link it with new information? Because if it's something that has to link new information with old information to create a new construct, that's a whole other kind of load. That's germane load. Then is there extraneous load, where I'm getting stuff that's unnecessary and my brain is having to try to decide which pieces and parts do I pay attention to. These 3 things, when they're present in our message, everything carries some cognitive load to it, but these are the 3 different elements for you to look at and say, do I have all of them present? Is it just that it's complex new information? This will give you a barometer of how heavy the load is of your message. If you're touching all 3, Or if you're touching too, you want to really make sure you get rid of the extraneous load. Limit extemporaneous storytelling, things like that, that may detract from the two very hard things our brain's already trying to do here. The thing I want you to understand, though, beyond cognitive load, is that most of us are in what we call states of cognitive overload. This is where our working memory, your working memory, think of that as the juggler at the front of your brain that's handling all the things coming in. When that juggler receives more information than it can handle comfortably, it doesn't just lead to frustration. What does it say? It leads to compromised decision making. Communication professionals, leaders, we cannot afford for people to have compromised decision making just because of our words. I believe it's our responsibility to understand what's going on in their minds and how do I change the way I deliver a message so I am not compromising their decision making with frustration and overwhelm in this incredibly noisy world that we live in. I believe we have a responsibility ethically to accelerate understanding and meaning when we know that this is the state that our audiences are in. So how do we do that? I've talked about these two minds that we have. So we all have a conscious, thinking, rational mind. It's the mind I'm talking to right now. But we all also have this non-conscious, feeling, emotional mind. And science estimates that we make 95 to 99% of decisions in that non-conscious mind. If we're only talking to the conscious, if we only concern ourselves with the conscious, we can get pretty far. We've all done that quite successfully for a very long time. But what we know is as noise and cognitive load increase in our world, it is harder and harder to make sense by only speaking to the conscious mind. If we want to be heard and authentically connect and instill change and lead audiences, we need to be engaging the non-conscious simultaneously, as it is the leader of decision-making in our minds. Add on top of this, by the way, our short-term memory can only hold about 7 things for 20 seconds and then it maxes out with lots of exercise where we'll put up a whole bunch of monosyllabic words like bird, and dirt, and rock. No one can remember more than 6 or 7 after 30 seconds. Are your messages more complicated than bird and dirt and rock? Probably, right? So how do we bridge that gap that is happening between memorability, ability to integrate it into the decision-citing part of our brain successfully, and then we achieve our engagement goals? Well, one of the things that is really changing how we think about getting research and getting information and knowledge to base our campaigns on first is a field I want to introduce you to called non-conscious research and measurement. Non-conscious measurement, where in our worlds we typically use research tools like surveys and focus groups and all the different modalities that are available to us. With non-conscious research, you have a whole bunch of other tools available to you as well to start using now to get into the mind of what's really going on in the audience and what they may be feeling, thinking, and wanting. Things like eye tracking, fMRIs, there's a huge amount of different things. I have a lot more information on those, but for today we don't have enough time to drill into each of them. But if you email me and are interested in non-conscious research, I can send you some videos too, kind of showing how it's done and things along those lines. But on the non-conscious research side, what they're finding, the headline that matters for all of us today in this pared down version, is that we have all these different cognitive biases that we use to help us facilitate decision making and creating meaning. This link is to what is here is called the Cognitive Bias Codex. This is a map of our communication coping methods. If you look on the side, you see they're organized by the fact that there's so many of these different coping methods based on the fact that our brain receives too much information and it's overloaded. And I want you to, instead of looking at these biases as a bias is something negative, I want to encourage you to start thinking about a bias as a coping mechanism that your brain evolutionarily created to help you survive. And I don't believe that your brain's evolutionary process to help you survive is evil. I think it is a gift, and it is our responsibility to understand how to interplay with that so that it is successful. We'll talk more about this as we go through the day. But look just here at some of those that because we have too much information coming at us, this whole first vein are all of the biases relative to the fact that we noticed things already primed in our memory or repeated more often. Or the fact, the next section, bizarre, funny, anthropomorphic things stick out and are more memorable than things that aren't funny. Things being funny and therefore being more memorable is not a negative bias. It's a way that your brain is helping you survive. Let's think about one of these biases. Let's drill into one a little bit more specifically, is survivorship bias. So survivorship bias is simply the fact that I'm going to remember what I see from survivors because they came back and they told me their story, and I'm not going to know so much about all the people that failed or that didn't come back because they're not here to share their story. It's why we tend to think, oh, it's easy to write a business book. Look at all the successful business books. Because you don't see the millions of books that didn't make it and how many people failed. The main point here is that we can reinforce false beliefs. So where this has a negative is that we can see negative or incorrect beliefs reinforced in thinking it's easy when it really isn't easy. So this is something for us to understand as receivers of information we have going on. This is an example of one in us that may make us think we understand something or think something's easy when it necessarily really isn't so much. And that has a huge amount of interplay for our life insurance clients and those that sell or need to communicate into spaces where we're trying to talk about things of the life insurance nature and how directly that counteracts with this bias. I said too, we have this tendency to orient our minds around the fact that bias is negative. We need to stop them. We need to if you look at definitions of bias across the internet, there's things like it's a fault in thinking, a way that the brain is broken or not working correctly. Those could not be more inaccurate. This is how your brain is designed to help you survive and thrive, and it's doing it very well. Instead, it's our responsibility to think, how do these biases and heuristics and all the things I'm learning about the brain help me facilitate understanding and connection and meaning more in my audiences? And that's the opportunity that we have. So if you continue through your workbooks, what we're going to do next is go through 3 keys to create meaning using neuropsychological engagement. We have more than 40 at this time in development from all of the science research that we know is a specific change to plug in to how we communicate. But in the interest of time, we're going to go through 3 this morning. First, I want to introduce you to the concept of nudge and choice architecture. Is there anyone in the room that already defines yourself and your part of your job as being a choice architect? Well, congratulations. You all have a new title to add to your business cards because you are all choice architects. We just don't necessarily think of it that way. So what in the world am I talking about? Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein wrote a spectacular Nobel Prize winning book and work with nudge, how to improve decisions. And what nudge is looking at is how do we change the way people make decisions, read the bottom here, without forbidding any choice or offering economic incentive. Guys, that's what we do as PR people. We're not here to say, all right, we're going to coupon this, and that's how we're going to help it be, promoted better. We have to come up with, typically in our jobs, with non-economically related incentives to help increase involvement in something. Nudge gives us a framework and an idea and choice architecture on how do I start doing that effectively, even though I don't have money as something that I can play with. So definition-wise, choice architecture is the design of different ways in which choices are presented, and then the impact that that presentation, that ordering, that way of thinking has on the end state of decision-making. So let's look at nudge in design. There's a few in the world, right? So this here on the end, we're looking at, we want to increase people recycling, throwing their trash away. So let's make a fun little maze to walk through to get over to the trash can. We're more likely to walk over there when there's a bit of play involved. In the middle here, it's creating the slightest amount of friction. What I'm trying to change is don't grab the roll and go and take all the paper in the world, right? So just a slight amount of friction and they're less likely to do that. They're getting the message from me, hey, slow your roll, okay? A little less here, friend, right? Or how about this, the side where it's very obvious, walk here, stand here. Now, how many of you have seen the signs at the top of the escalator that say that? What do you think is the difference when you put that little nudge there? We're all much more familiar in our post-COVID world with nudge and the 6-inch distancing stickers on the ground. Those are a nudge to help you understand what is that distant space when we talk nudge and design. There was a study done at a grocery store, produce department, all the way in the back of the store. Not that many people go into the produce department. What can we do to affect change on that? Well, we could put signs at the front of the store about the sales in the produce department. We could talk about how rich and wonderful things are there. Or we can get 9 out of 10 people to go to the produce department only by putting green arrows on the ground. No words with them, just green arrows. Green is in that direction. And 9 out of 10 people in the store that enter the store now go to the produce department. This is one of the most famous nudges in design and in public health, and one of the first that really started why we're here today. In case you can't see, yes, that is a urinal. And yes, that is a hyper-realistic sticker of a fly inside this urinal. This is in Amsterdam at the airport. They had a problem with what they called, I love it so politically correct, spillage, okay? It was a mess in the men's room. It was a mess. And some poor soul had that job of cleaning that up and quantifying how much that was. And so the goal is to say, can we nudge the boys to be cleaner? And so they tried it with this sticker of a fly. And what do you think was the change in behavior? If we had, is an 80% decrease. There is a website where they sell the fly urinal stickers, by the way. It like started this whole own thing for any other boy moms out there, you know, that need this kind of help in your house. But fascinating to see just what do we normally think of as communicators? We think of a sign with messages, with words. But that might not actually be our greatest tool sometimes. How about this? Blood donors in Sweden get a text message whenever their blood saves someone's life. That gives me chills every time I read it, and I even know it's coming. What would that do for you? If you're hired to help increase blood donations in your community, please know this is an option. It's not just how you say the words. It's not just how you write the text. But what are we doing to emotionally engage that mind, to emotionally have people part of this process with us? The power company in my neighborhood follows a model like this, which is a nudge-based model. When you compare people to their neighbors, 8 times more cost-effective at decreasing excess energy usage than interventions like rebates and discounts and couponing, the financial side of things. Would you like to show your client an 8x increase in outcome success that they didn't have to discount or change their finances for? H&R Block partnered with the government to autofill FAFSA forms with their H&R Block information. When that happened, they were a full 8.1 percentage points more likely to attend college. Okay, I sit with that number for a second. Maybe it's because I'm a daughter of a high school teacher, but that gets me too. I want to affect that kind of change in people. I want my words and my work to be so effective that I can say to you, 8% more people went to college. Kids are in college because we auto-filled a certain part of their form because we understood nudge and the impact of choice. And that the choice of having to fill out this whole form versus, oh, well, 3 fields are filled out for me already. It makes it a little easier. They're helping me. I'm going to keep going. How powerful is that? In Australia, they had a beach, had a problem with pollution. What do we do if we have problems with litterers? Put up signs. Don't be a slob. What's wrong with you? Put your trash in the trash can. Or what they did on this beach in Australia is they created this beautiful art installation, this big wire mesh fish named Gobi. And Gobi has a sign on the front of him that says something like, hi, my name's Gobi and I'm hungry and I eat trash. Okay? So what you can't tell is this is super fine mesh. You can shove trash into Gobi from all over. So now what happens is they have to come, and what the article was about is how many more times they have to empty Goby than they ever expected, because people come to the beach to feed Goby. I'm not just there of like, well, I'll see some trash, maybe I'll be a good person and I'll pick it up, and like that whole thought process. They changed the thought process and gave them something fun to do to also serve their community and be there. So it's not, let's just go for a walk on the beach tonight. Let's go for a walk. Let's see if we can find anything to feed Goby. Or in design too. It spoke to your non-conscious before it spoke to your conscious. There's a perfect example of it. We know banana peel means slip. I got it before I got the words. And the laughing part is more memorable too. I'm more likely to say, okay, like most of us don't like to be told. Anybody like to be told what to do? Yeah, no, not me so much. Right? I see, hey, a banana peel, and it's like, friend, I'm looking out for you. Be careful. It's slippy over here, okay? More likely to agree, as opposed to the thought process of, don't you tell me what to do. I'll walk wherever I want to walk, thank you. All right? How do we affect that change? In a healthcare system, at a hospital, they had this issue of, with a question of, how do we get people to make more healthy choices in the food that they get out of the cafeteria? Or a hospital, for goodness sakes, people should be eating healthy. So what are our options in how we communicate to people in a cafeteria line? Well, we have ingredient lists, we have the nutritional information. If you ever looked at an ingredient or nutritional thing, that is a tightly packed paragraph of size 6 font, okay? Can you consume that as you're walking down the line in a cafeteria? Not really. So what they did is change to a traffic light system, red, yellow, green. If it's not so good for you, it's red. If it's good for you, it's green. We get the idea, right? The thing that I want you to see, most of all, look at all the change. But they decreased red beverage consumption by 40% in 2 years, 39% in 2 years. Okay, did everybody just not get that Coca-Cola was not necessarily the best thing for your body before? Of course we understood that. Everyone cognitively knew high sugar sodas are not ideal for our body. But what made them make the change? A red dot. How sophisticated is a red dot? I'm going to say it's a hell of a lot more sophisticated than any of our communication, because look at the change that it created. That's a more effective way of engaging the mind than any and all of the words we could ever have put together. And this is in our repertoire, and it is our responsibility to think about how we use these things to accelerate understanding. So in your work, when you're thinking about creating communication differently thanks to nudge and choice architecture, I want you to ask yourself, what perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors am I trying to affect? What choices do I want the audience to consider or reconsider? And then what friction exists between their current states and their goal states? Because that then will help you to start to realize, where do I need to be approaching strategically my communication differently? Perhaps it shouldn't be word-based. Perhaps it should be play-based. Perhaps it should be color-based. What are the different ways I start engaging? Because of nudge and because I am a choice architect. The next key we want to talk about is social proof. Now, has anyone not heard of social proof? We all know social proof is the fact that we look out to society to help us know what to do. I often debate whether or not to include this at the beginning, because I want to give you, there's so many keys. I have no short, I could talk for 5 days up here and not run out. And so I want to give you all new information, but I'm putting social proof out here even though all of you know about it, because so many people do it wrong. And these things, you can do them in the right way, or you can do it in a way that will kick you in the butt and backfire and make your campaign even less effective. And that's what happened with us and Transamerica and some of the messaging that they had related to social proof. So Transamerica came to us because they had just launched a whole new website for a certain microproduct, and it was not doing well. They had messaging from one of the top messaging agencies in the country that is on national news regularly because of how well they are known for messaging companies and understanding the heart of the consumer and what the consumer really wants. And so this is the hero message on their website. 84% of Americans are not saving enough for retirement. And when they launched this new and improved phenomenal messaging with this big social proof anchor, sales started to recede. They weren't doing better. They started going backwards and going backwards quickly. So they hired us to come in and do a behavioral communications audit of what's wrong, what's happening, where is the mind getting offended? And then a choice architecture audit, going through all the forms, going through all the websites, going through all the brochures. Where are we offending choice? What the heck happened? And one of the main things we see is this hero message. Well, if social proof says, I look to my outside audience to tell me how I should behave, I look to society, I'm going to look at media and case studies, and these are all different ways that I can go about activating and engaging social proof. And this is because we all, I want you to think just a few hundred years ago, we all still survived by community. We were settling this country, right? We were on this wagon train. If Elizabeth here, you know, if I decide I want to go live over there, that's going to be pretty darn hard. It's going to be by myself. I don't have any water. I don't have any food. I don't have anybody to help me with shelter or survival. Like, I needed the tribe to survive. While we are much more autonomous in today's evolved society, this is why is still incredibly encoded in our minds, is survival by community. And we do need one another. This is why social proof is so, so powerful. A study that was done, and I want you to get this because it's really important to understand social proof and the difference between just presenting a social proof and personalizing it. There was a study done where at a hotel, you know, the little pieces of paper in our rooms about recycling towels. Well, they asked, will you recycle towels because everybody else in the hotel is doing it, basically. Instead of a water conservation, help the planet, gosh darn it. Instead of that, what if it's just social proof? What if it's just, at this Westin, we recycle towels. The guests that stay at this Westin, they care and they recycle. When they did it that way, 26% increase with a, this hotel does this, the people who stay here do this, please do it with us. Then they hyper-personalized. All of the people in room 201 recycle their towels. Guest in room 201, will you recycle your towels with us too? 33% of people started to recycle, right? This wasn't done to try to affect the recycling rate in the hotel. There's other emotional factors about your relationship with your guests and such. This was done purely just to see if I present it in a social proof format instead of an environmental format, do I affect change? And the answer is, I show people that others are doing this, instead of an environmental request, a 26% increase and change. Social proof can be so powerful. We know this in social media posts, influencer testimonials, why we get media coverage for our clients, getting awards. We'd vouch for their purity, but an independent party already has. That's social proof in play. It's a huge fundamental underpinning of public relations and what we do. But here's where it can go wrong. And here's how to make sure you are never the agency that we replaced for Transamerica. Also a study, this was done by Robert Caldini, at the Arizona Petrified Forest. Anybody ever been to the Arizona Petrified Forest? So there's only so much petrified wood to go around. It's not petrifying super fast, okay? So if we go in there and we start pocketing it, we're gonna have a problem. There's not gonna be any for the rest of us to see. And they had this real problem with theft, and their traditional signage was something like, don't steal from the park, please, you know, leave it behind. So they wanted to test this type of a message. And they put up a sign, many past visitors have removed petrified wood from the park, stealing your heritage one small piece at a time. Those jerks, how dare they? What do you think happened? It tripled theft, tripled it. Because did anybody have go through their head? Well, dang, if everybody's already taken it, I guess I better get mine too. It's not gonna be any left anyway. Because I look to society to see what others are doing, and then I know that's what I should do too in order to survive with my community. Got it? So let's go back to Transamerica. 84% of Americans are not saving enough for retirement. What does that make you want to do? This was a product for, it's my first job, my first opportunity to get a 401k. I don't know what 401k is, right? Because that's my first job and I'm 20 and that's confusing with all those letters and numbers and whatnot. And then you're telling me 84% of people don't do it. That's why no one did it. That's why the numbers were rapidly reversing. So instead, what should we have been saying? A negatively framed social proof tells our audience specifically what not to do. You will see them all over the place, though. You'll see like, oh, some communicator somewhere learned social proof matters, so I'm just going to social proof everything. And they social proof it in the negative, and then we see backfire. And we see the opposite happening of what we were wanting. Whereas if we talk about saving for retirement, it's smart, it's easy. Little profile pieces of those that are doing it that relate psychographically and demographically to our audience, we see remarkable transition and change. 3 questions for you and for your teams as you're thinking about engaging in social media, or excuse me, as you're engaging in social proof. What beliefs and behaviors need to be emphasized? What societal agreements exist around these beliefs and behaviors already? And who, what, where does my audience respect on this topic? So staying with the retirement example, I will respect my peer. If I work at Subway and I'm making sandwiches and this is my first opportunity to get a retirement product, I don't want to necessarily hear from Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey's amazing. Well, sure, I'd love Dave Ramsey if I had the chance. But I'm a 20-year-old guy at Subway, my first job. I want to see other 20-year-old guys at Subway. I want to see other people like me. I want to see my persona, my audience type, what are they doing? And frame what they are doing in a way that encourages me to do the same, that is a positive aspect. All right, the third effect that we are going to teach today is contrast effect. This is one of the most powerful. That's why I have to include it right up front for you. These are 3 of the most important of all that we teach. What contrast effect says is, I'm going to remember something. It is far much more memorable to me if it is in contrast to something else. Our brains, remember all those decisions that we're having to make? Remember how fatigued and exhausting that is? When something is in contrast to another thing, it's much more clear what the differences are, but it is also where we get really judgy and perceiving things only in relation to one another. It's important to know that that's happening whether we involve ourselves with it or not. So how did Whole Foods use this in their PR program to increase outcomes? When they wanted to enter the conversation about what's happening with bees in the world, they put out a press release about your produce choices with bees, contrasting with your produce choices without bees. This was celebrated as one of the most successful pieces of communication that year in our PR circles when this came out. What did it do for you? What did you find yourself doing? Because I know for me, I looked at it and I immediately started to zone in on what I care about. Like, where are my Honeycrisp apples? I cannot do this diet without Honeycrisp apples. I need these. I have to be where I am. We all have a different way of engaging with it, but that contrast effect is immediate, right? We see how much black space there is of empty shelves. Really contrasting things for people. Powerful. And so many ways we can do it in design, in our words. This is from Saatchi and Saatchi. Of course, we all know them. Great way of contrasting how paper usage is hurting our planet. Or in advertising, here from Coca-Cola, I love this example so much. So Pepsi, excuse me, it's from Pepsi, but they put out an ad saying, we wish you a scary Halloween. Like, because wouldn't it be so scary? You go to drink Pepsi and it's, or, you know, you see. But then Coke came out and said, everybody wants to be a hero. Love it, love it. So fun. Okay, so how do we align with contrast effect? We want to specifically be looking at states of before and after, with and without, you versus others, now versus later. All the ways that we can contrast, and you can probably contrast every single message that you're trying to communicate. Don't hyper contrast every single thing, but to begin and end with contrast, we always remember the beginning and the end the most in a message. Really want to encourage you to bracket things with contrast. Start exploring how we can do that. The 3 questions to ask yourself and your teams. What positive attributes of my topic can be further enhanced if I contrast them against their opposites? What opposing states exist around my topic? Mapping all of the opposing states, you'll start to really quickly see the different pieces of contrast that you may have as options to highlight. Where you may only have like 2 come to mind at first, so they're the most obvious. But once we start mapping opposing states, we really start to see we have a lot of opportunity to use contrast to our effect. Or what pain may exist or occur in contrast to the gain that my message offers. Pain versus gain. This is a huge fundamental underpinning of a lot of what we teach as well, is how do I recognize the pain that my audience is going through and reframe that into a gain. It's Kahneman's prospect theory is the fundamental of this for the other science researchers in the room who want to go into that. But the point is that when we talk about the pain you're experiencing, the problem that you're experiencing, and contrast it with the gain that you stand to achieve from this message, from this change, we are far more likely to facilitate that change. So in summary, we talked about a few things today for you to start to do a little bit differently in order to start using behavioral communication. The first is, think about how am I engaging the conscious and the non-conscious mind simultaneously. If my communication is only engaging the conscious mind, then I know that I'm only speaking to 1 to 5% of my audience's mind. Recognize that. Number 2, we are here to appeal to non-conscious decision and understanding. It's now our responsibility in this world of hyper noise and confusion and chaos to specifically be orienting my message to appeal to the non-conscious decision-making mind so it shows up at the party and it participates in that decision-making process with understanding, with clarity. Number 3, how do we ethically nudge and architect choice with awareness? The next slide, I have a link for you. September is PR Ethics Month. I have an article in Strategic Magazine, the PR magazine in Ireland and UK and in those regions, on the ethical imperative for behavioral communication, and why I believe we have a responsibility to start thinking about this influence that we have on people now that we know that this is how decision making is done. Now that the science has told us all this, how can we continue to only talk to 1 to 5% of our audience's minds? Number 4, how do we sync social proof with the positive desired change effect that we want? Recognizing we will not use negative social proofs unless we are trying to encourage the negative behavior. The negative in some places is a good thing. It may be seen as what I'm not doing. And if we're wanting to encourage what's not being done, that's the only time then we would use negative social proof. And then lastly, contrast pain and gain. You can contrast tons of things, but when you're in your contrast world, most specifically ideate, what's the pain people feel, what's the gain my message delivers, and how do I contrast those 2 things? And with that, I can open things up for some questions, if we have any questions. All right, how are we feeling, everybody? You okay? Is your exploding head emoji?
The Department of Health and Social Services is going to hire you to get vaccine rates up.
There's a lot to talk about there. A whole lot to talk about there. So, yes?
Where have you seen this, or where would you like to see this in the political space?
So,
campaigns and be using more of this if they're not already.
So the question is, where do we see this having applicability in the political space? There's actually when Obama was in office, we had a nudge unit in the White House. I'm not sure if it's still there today, but there's so much opportunity, I think, that we have to start thinking about our constituents and thinking about what they're really experiencing and how to serve them where they are and communicate where they are. On Medium, I have an article called Designed to Divide that I wrote last year on why I believe the mask debate has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with, and only everything to do with messaging confusion. If you read it and see when it was written and the timeline of things, there's some very specific things that were said by the people in charge very early on when we were still in states of integrating all of this new information. And because certain things were said that were anchors placed at the beginning of messaging that we talk about in that article is why they then triggered a for sure guarantee that we would have the debate that we do. Back to the core of your question, I think we need to educate people more. I think that leaders, communicators, the communicators that counsel those leaders, the communicators that write the messages for those leaders, we need to understand what's going on. And that if I state a declarative that will not change while people are in a state of crisis, I will never be able to change it again. And that's what happened. A declarative statement was made at the beginning of March by Dr. Fauci that we do not need to be wearing masks. He was right at that moment, perhaps, but he didn't leave the door open for consideration and change. That's what backfire effect teaches us a bit more. We have to leave the door open, or else then when change may come, you're just seen as a hypocrite, and I'm not gonna believe you because you're changing your story. Science's knowledge changed. We didn't know on March 5th, I think it was, what we knew on March 30th, or a year later on March 30th. The things change, and so it's all about those words. And I think that the responsibility, first and foremost, is on then the people who teach those leaders and write messages for them. Yes?
Is behavioral communications blanketed across as a whole, or is it divided into subcategories, male, female brain, learning styles? Because all of that would affect behavioral communications, how your brain processes, and all of that.
Great question.
Subcategories, or how does that apply?
So the question is there overarching behavioral comm, and then do we have subcategories as well for men versus women? I think that may be somewhere down the road someday, but for now we have so much material that is new, that is just about linking in general the non-conscious with the conscious in all minds. Where we are more focused on the segmentation of it is looking at different cultures. We don't see differences between men and women and even so much ages. There is some between hyper young and hyper older audiences, but where we see it is cultural differences. So in Asia Pacific, there may be some differences culturally to how certain things are responded to as opposed to in America or in India or in South America, things like that.
What about, I was thinking with the signage, so some people are visual learners, so to see a picture or the walking steps, a pathway. Others, though, maybe auditorial or something like that. So I guess the question is, how do you consider, do you just put a blanket, everyone's going to be this learning style primarily when you're looking to create campaigns like that? Or, I don't know, it's a tricky question. It's hard for me to even figure out the best way to ask it, but.
I hear you. I think the answer is that we're less concerned about those delineating factors now and more looking at them from the lens of their non-conscious mind is running the show, and how do I appeal to the non-conscious decision structures? Because I know that the non-conscious decision structure, man, woman, child, they like all these things. And we don't have a map, or haven't had a map until now, of how to start activating the mind against all of those things to respond positively. So I'm thinking of the Transamerica example. Whether it was men or women that we were trying to reach, the outcome was the same. I may dial in the strategies, all of this research then done, I may dial the strategies in if I know my audience is all male, to include male type examples and things like that that I know will appeal, because then they'll identify more with men than they would with women, and so on and so forth. So there may be some strategic things that come back into our process. Yes?
I was reading an article recently about defaults and how powerful they are, and I'm wondering if you have an opinion about that.
Oh, a lot. So the question is, do I have opinions around defaults and how much defaults make a difference? Think back to the choice architecture part of our conversation. There's a really interesting chart online, if you want to search it up, about the difference in organ donation percentages of people signed up to donate organs across Europe, and it divides all the different countries in Europe. And you'll see most of the countries in Europe, they have like 90%, and then there's some that have like 20%. And so you ask yourself, what's the difference? Like, people in these countries so much nicer and like care about their neighbor versus the people over here. The difference is only the default. It's only what happens at the DMV. In the places where they have 80% of people, the box is checked. Yes, I want to donate my organs. You don't have to do anything other than opt out. You are already opted in. So 80%. Those where they have to take the step of clicking the box and opting in are the ones with only at 20. So we should absolutely, as choice architects, be thinking through the defaults. Ethically, what are the defaults for me to have there in a place where I have to then, as the receiver of the information, say, no, I don't want to donate my organs, versus I have to take a step to say, yes, I do want to donate my organs.
Right, like I feel like that comes up too as a negative with like social media, like the defaults are that your information is public, for example, versus defaulting that, you know, this is only for the people I choose and things like that.
That's a huge issue in data privacy, and it's exploited. It really should be opt-in to have your information be used, and you know, all the industry wants it the reverse.
And there's
it has great consequences. It's difficult to explain. We try to use contrast for that because it's a very complicated issue, and if you can't explain it in 5 seconds, you're dead.
Well, and this is a great example too of where we say the word ethical, right? And we go back to it. Now there's chapters more I could have put in here on nudge that go into the ethics of it. How do we make sure it's ethically aligned? Thaler has blog posts where he will call people out if he sees nudges that are not done ethically. Recall there was one for United Airlines in one of his posts, because it is not easy to opt out. You have to be able to opt out in a single one click from the same page. If you make people start jumping, then you're in that unethical territory. It's about, this is powerful stuff. It makes a huge difference. So we have to ethically do it right.
Because industry has doing that.
Yeah.
Now there's a global data privacy regulation from Europe.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys aren't going to do it ethically, then we're going to do it for you.
Exactly.
Repetitive donations.
What was that?
Oh, yeah.
Repetitive donations. It defaults to repeated donation as opposed to one-time donation.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We really have to have our strategic counselor hats on with the skills, unique skills that we have as public relations leaders and counselors, and making sure that we're applying that in a truly ethics-based way. Yes?
Maybe prefacing it with the time we have on any question on ethics is going to be probably too short. But connecting something you said earlier in the presentation around survivor's bias.
Yes.
And ethics. We focus primarily on social justice communications. We work with a lot of community-based organizations on public affairs and issues, typically with 95% of our clients are nonprofits. So that question of ethics and power structures and culture in between, and which dominant culture controls the message, and how we have the resources to push that message as the survivors, as the winners of a cultural and historical, inequitable war. There's something to the ethics of who controls the message here.
Yeah.
And I'm really fascinated by that. I'm thinking of a lot of the work that folks at the Frameworks Institute have been doing around this kind of messaging as well, and which frames work best to move certain public messages around issues. So I'm just really fascinated with that. I'm definitely going to read what you're saying, but this is really fascinating what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here sharing it. I think it's a very exciting opportunity that we have. I mean, we all love to communicate. It's why we're running the types of businesses that we do. And I think it's exhilarating when we realize that there's ways to evolve how we do that based on our changing world, so that we can give the clients we serve, the audiences that we serve, the younger professionals that we serve, this new framework and perspective on how to see. Look, science has given us a whole new insight on what's happening when we communicate. Let's integrate that into how we communicate. It doesn't just make us a little bit better. It fundamentally shifts how we sit and serve as a counselor. As I'm talking and advising my clients, it isn't just what my 20+ years of experience have taught me. It is what the science also says that we need to do. And it's harder to argue with the science of social or of proof, or the science of contrast effect, or the science of choice architecture, and that being what is underpinning our strategies that we present. I mean, I know this is in the brochure as a business development event to make it really clear. This has been highly successful and profitable for our firm. We are teaching and training corporations. They are having us now edit and audit and manage content we would have never had an opportunity to serve them with and help them on before. So it really evolves us as counselors as well to a much more sophisticated level from my experience. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.